Good day, students. Welcome to mathgotserved.com. In this clip, we're going to be going over how to solve quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This standard is covered in Algebra 1, 2, and Pre-Calculus courses. Don't forget there are 6 practice problems at the end of this presentation we'd like you to try out to demonstrate mastery of what we went over in this presentation. If you'd like to gain access to our playlist or other valuable resources, take a look at the link in the description below, or you can just visit our website at mathgotserved.com. Alrighty, the instructions for the examples that we're working on as follows were to solve the given quadratics, quadratic equations by factoring. Okay, there are other ways that you can solve quadratic equations, but in this particular presentation we're just going to focus on the factorization method. Number one, let's say we have 3x squared plus 18x plus 24 equals 0. Okay, so when you're solving a quadratic equation, just as with factoring, you want to ask yourself, can I reduce the equation by an integer? Okay, is there a rational factor that I can extract from the entire equation? That's the question. Okay, so the question is, if you look at the three terms we have, 3x squared, 18x, and 24, is there an integer that goes into all three terms? And the answer is yes, and that is 3. 3 is the common factor. Okay? Now, if that wasn't apparent to you, you can decompose or break down each term to make that obvious. So 3x squared can be broken down into 3 times x. 18x can be broken up into 3 times 2 times x. Okay, and then 24 is 6 times 4, right? So you can break it down into 3 times 2, which is 6, times 2, which is 12, times 2, which is 24. Now, if you look at all three terms, you will notice that 3 is a common factor. The GCF here is 3. So we factor it out. Okay, when you factor out a number, you divide it out. So this 3 is divided out, divided out, divided out, and we are left with x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. All right, now since we factored out a number, you gotta be careful. If you factor out a number, you can divide both sides by numbers only. Okay, you cannot divide by variables, or else you're going to be eliminating answers. So divide both sides of the equation by 3, and we have a reduced form, which is x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. Now this is a quadratic trinomial. We factored problems like this in our previous presentation, so if you've forgotten how to do it, you can review those videos. Alright, so to factor this, we're going to use the x game, okay? The AC method, so A in this problem is 1, so that's A, B, C. AC goes on top, B goes on the bottom. AC is 8, B is 6. So what two numbers multiply to give you 8 and add to give you 6? That's 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 plus 4 is 6. All right, so since A is equal to 1 in this example, guess what? We can skip grouping. You don't have to factor by grouping since A is equal to 1. We can jump right to the factored state, which is x plus 2, the first number we got from the x game, times x plus 4, the second number we got from the x game. Okay? All right, so we set that equal to 0. Now we're going to use the zero product property to finish this off. So we set the first factor to 0, and then you set the second factor to 0. You solve the first one by subtracting 2 from both sides. That will give us x equals -2. And then you solve the second one for x by subtracting 4 from both sides. and that gives us x equals -4. So our solutions are x equals the set -4 and -2. All right, let's take a look at another example. For question number 2, what if we have the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 16x minus 18 equals 0? All right, so let's solve this. So before we try to use the x game or any other factorization method to solve this, we want to ask ourselves, is this quadratic equation reducible? Is there a number that goes into all three terms that I can divide out this equation by so it's a simpler, in a simpler form? And the answer is yes. 2 is a common factor for all three terms. Okay? So if that's not obvious to you, you can break it down like we did in number 1. 2 times x minus 2 times 2, that's 4 times 2, 8 times 2, 16 times x minus 2 times 3 times 3. Okay, so now in this broken down form, you can see that 2 is a common factor. The GCF in this equation is 2, okay? So what we're going to do is factor out that GCF and divide it out. So factor it out, divide it out. And you are left with x squared minus 8x minus 9 equals 0. Now, since you factored out a rational number, you can divide both sides of the equation by that number. Remember, never divide by variables, okay? You just divide by numbers to reduce the equation. So we now have x squared. Let me write it. We have x squared minus 8x minus 9 equals 0, just like we have over here. So for this one, a is 1. Again, our invisible coefficient. B is -8. C is -9. Now we're going to solve this by playing a game. Do you know what game that is? It's the x game. Okay, we're going to play the x game like we did in number 1. And then in this particular example, a is equal to 1, so we can skip grouping, alrighty? AC goes on the top, B goes on the bottom. AC is -9, B is -8. What's two numbers multiply to give you -9 and add to give you -8? You can use -9 and 1. Okay? Alright. In this problem, A is 1, as you can see here. So what does that mean? Since A is equal to 1, you can skip grouping and go right to the factored state. The factored state is quantity x minus 9 times quantity x plus 1 equals 0. So we use the zero product property, okay? And then we'll set both factors to 0 as we did in problem number 1. And then to solve the first one, you add 9 to both sides of the equation to get x isolated, okay? When you add 9 to both sides of the equation, you get the first answer, x equals 9. And then the second one, you subtract 1 from both sides of the equation, and x is equal to -1. So our solutions are x equals the set of numbers -1 and 9. Alrighty, let's take a look at another type of problem. This particular one will be slightly different from what we just did. So let's say we have the quadratic equation 4x squared minus 8x plus 3 equals 0. Okay? Alright, so the first things first, is there a common factor that we can extract from this quadratic equation that can enable us to simplify it? Or there isn't a common factor? Okay, if it's not obvious to you, you can break it down. 2 times 2 times x minus 2 times 2 times 2 times x plus 3 times 1. No common factor, no GCF, so let's multiply it back together. We have 4x squared minus 8x plus 3. So we're going to use the x game. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and solve this. We're going to factor using the x game. So AC goes on top, B goes on the bottom. So AC is 12 and B is negative 8. So what two numbers multiply to give you 12 and add to give you 8? Let's just go over the combinations. Again, I know we already went over this in the previous tutorial, but let's just review this just for fun. Okay, so we have 12. So what two numbers multiply to give you 12? 1 times 12. We have 2 times 6, 3 times 4, and we have a complete set of pairs. So the one that can give me 8 is 2 and 6. Voila. So 2 and 6, if we want to resolve the sign, in order for the sum to be negative and the product positive, they both have to be negatives. In this particular problem, A is not 1. A is negative 8. I'm sorry, A is 4. So we have to factor by grouping. It's inevitable here. So let's go ahead and do it. So we have 4x squared, and then take the numbers you got from the x game, minus 2x, minus 6x plus 3 equals 0. And then we break it down to center and factor by grouping. Okay, so bring it in front of the sign. All right, so let's see. On the left side, we have 2 times x minus 2 times x. On the right side, we have negative 2 times 3 times x plus 3 times 1 equals 0. So we've broken everything down. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to start to factor out the common factors. Alrighty. On the left side of the partition, we have a GCF of 2x. So 2x and then 2x can be factored out. So when we factor out 2x, we're going to be left with, now they're going to get divided out, and 1 is going to be left behind. 1, 1, and then this is 1, and then this is 1. When we multiply what's left together, you have 2x minus 1 times 1, which is 1. All right, over here, notice we're factoring out a negative. We talked about this in the other presentation. When you factor out a negative, signs flip. Okay, so we're going to be factoring out negative 3 from both sides. So when you factor out negative 3, you're going to have to divide it out, okay? So this 3 gets divided out. And then when you factor out a minus, this minus comes out. This will become a plus. It becomes the opposite. And then this positive will become a negative. So you'll be left with 2x minus 1. All right, freeze and check. Make sure everything is fine. The quantities in the parentheses must be identical, as is the case here. So we're looking good. So we're going to take those two quantities that are identical, 2x minus 1 and 2x minus 1, and we're going to factor them out, okay? So factor it out. When you factor it out, you divide it out. So this quantity is gone, and this quantity is gone. And you're left with 2x minus 3. Group those together, and there goes your factored state. To finish this off, we're going to set both factors to 0. So we have 2x minus 1 equals 0, and 2x minus 3 equals 0. All right, to solve this, you're going to add 1 to both sides. And you have 2x equals 1. And then divide by 2, okay? Divide by 2, divide by 2. And then your final answer is x equals 1/2. All right, for this one right here, to solve for x, we're going to add 3 to both sides. What does that give us? That gives us 2x equals 3. Okay, and then to finish it off, we divide both sides by 2. And that gives us our second answer, x equals 3 over 2. Okay, so the solutions to our quadratic equation are x equals 1/2 and x equals 3/2. Alrighty, let's try out one more example and then we'll give you an opportunity to do some practice problems in order to demonstrate mastery of what we just covered. Alrighty, so number 4, let's say we have the quadratic equation 3x squared plus 10x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, so first things first, let's see if we can factor out any GCF. As you can see, nothing is factorable. If it's not that apparent to you, you can break it down and inspect it to see if there are any common factors between the three terms. And as you can see, there are no common factors, so we just unite it back together. Alright, so now we're going to play the x game, okay? So let's go ahead and factor this using the AC method. So AC is 24 in this case, and then B is 10. Alright, so think about all the numbers that multiply to give you 24. Which one adds or subtracts to give you 10? And it's going to be 2 times 12. Smaller one is negative. A is not equal to 1, so we can't skip grouping. We have to factor by grouping. So we have 3x squared minus 2x plus 12x. We got these two numbers from the x game, minus 8. And then we'll break it down the center and factor by grouping. Alrighty. So let's break it down and then go from there. Okay, so on the left side we have 3 times x minus 2 times x. And on the right side, plus if you break down 12 is 2 times 2, which is 4 times 3 times x minus 2 times 2 times 2 equals 0. Okay, so what can we factor out on the left side of the partition? X is common, so we can factor out x. So if you factor out x, you divide it out, and you are left with 3x minus 2. On the right side, what's common? Well, we have a positive, which is great, so no signs change here. We have 2 and a 2 common on both sides, so we'll factor out 2 times 2, which is 4. Factor it out and divide it out. Okay, and then you're left with 3x minus 2. Freeze right here and check to make sure everything is looking good. The quantities in the parentheses are identical, so we're looking fantastic. So we're going to take those identical quantities and we're going to factor them out. Okay, so when we factor it out, we have quantity 3x minus 2. And then what's left are what we factored out, the GCF on the right and left sides of the partition. X and positive 4. They are clustered together. They're grouped together in their own nice little parentheses. Alright, so we're going to finish this off using the zero product property. So the product of these two quantities are equal to 0. So either the first one is equal to 0 or the second one is equal to 0. All right, let's solve the first equation. We're going to add 2 to both sides. And that yields 3x equals 2. And then divide both sides by 3. And our final answer is going to be x equals 2/3. And on the right side, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides of the equation. Okay, when you do that, you will have x equals -4. So ladies and gentlemen, the solutions to our quadratic equation is x equals 2/3 and x equals, well, let's put the smaller one first. Fill in the set roster notation format. So -4 and 2/3 are the two solutions to question number 4. Alrighty, now it's your time to do some practice problems. Now what we'd like you to do at this time is pause this video presentation and try out the 6 problems here, which requires you to solve the quadratic equations by factoring. And when you're done, click on the playback button, and then we're going to reveal what the answers are. Welcome back. So hopefully you had a chance to try out these 6 problems. These are the solutions. Number 1, it's x equals -3 and x equals -1. For number 2, the answers are x equals 3 and -1. For number 3, the answers are x equals -1 and x equals 9/2. For number 4, the answers are x is -7/3 and x is -1. For number 5, the answers are x equals -1/4 and x equals 3. And then for number 6, the answers are x equals -2/5 and x equals 2. Alrighty, so how well did you do on these 6 practice problems? Let us know in the comment section below how well you did. If you have any questions or clarifications concerning these problems that you just worked on, or any of the example problems we did, just specify it in the comment section below and we'll be glad to help you out. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this presentation. We really appreciate it. If you found the contents of this tutorial helpful in your studies of quadratics, to give us a like. Your positive feedback is very valuable to us. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel for updates to future presentations such as this. If you have any questions about what we covered in this tutorial, or any quadratic related question in general, just place your question in the comments section below. More support resources can be found at mathgotserved.com to check it out, or just take a look at the link in the description below. Thanks again for watching and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.